So now if you look at Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers 10,000 hours, why are those 10,000 hours people successful? They have gone and connected certain dots or certain neurons in their brain where they become an expert in it. So I personally believe you have to treat your brain like a muscle. And you have to, and sadly for my children, this is what they hear almost on a every day or a second day basis, and actually stimulate it from all sides. There is no left or right brain. There are only three parts. Best judgment comes from the highest portion of it. And there are absolutely practices that you can follow that actually unlock it. So I think I will only encourage people that this is something that is very much acquired skill. And the traits that I have seen, and you should add to this, like for these infinity entrepreneurs, how do they actually exercise their brain? Voracious appetite for learning. Whether it is, I mean, with many of these, we'll get grilled when we meet them, and constantly learning, and then following up saying, can you send me this, that? So voracious appetite for learning, unbelievable curiosity, serious personal growth mindset. I think if you have this, then you start practicing these things that you know, kind of put it all together and create these infinity entrepreneurs.
Conversely, I was thinking we didn't talk about culture,
Yeah.
and everyone, you know, there's the famous whatever culture eats strategy for lunch or breakfast, and it's key to scaling an org, but we didn't really talk about it. I'm surprised.
I'm a bit confused on this, because if I look at some of the, and I can't name those companies, and I'm not talking about Indian companies, if I look at globally, in the bull markets, all their culture seemed great. But when the tide turns, you hear, you know, New York Times articles come out about the culture in a bunch of these companies. So I don't know. I feel that these traits we spoke about, let's take customer obsession. Maybe that becomes the culture. And at Amazon, maybe there wasn't a focus on culture creation, but customer obsession is their culture, right? You and I were discussing about Apple. Also, do these things have to be measured over a very long period of time or a short period of time, right? Tesla is obviously clearly innovation and breakthrough speed and scale. So the reality is, there are many examples of infinity entrepreneurs and of infinity companies which have over some measurable period of time not demonstrated great cultures. Personally, I think it's very important, but we have to look at data also. I don't know what do you think?
No, I think to be very honest, I think culture is a very tricky topic to discuss, and over the last like 5-10 years, one can argue that there is a culture of entitlement also in the startup industry, with, you know, startup industry, you know, companies ending up like doubling pay versus traditional.
But it was created.
Sectors.
It was created by the companies. I mean, some of the freebies that used to be considered great today are being banned.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm not entirely sure. Like most people say culture, and then automatically, you know, you think of foosball tables and, you know, whatever, you know, PlayStations. I'm not sure entirely like what exactly good culture is. But
we have a token culture here. Huh? A small ping pong table.
There used to be some people who would play, but we were talking about this, but like Apple hasn't launched a new product in 5-7 years.
That's very big.
And you know, somewhere, you know, culture does get defined by founders and the founding team.
I guess that's a good one to double click into. So Steve Jobs came back 96, 97, let's say, took about 2 years to settle in, and then he kind of became ill 2009 plus. In those 10 years, how many products came out? iPod, iMac, AirPod, iPad.
I mean,
new Macs, iPhone, of course.
6.
iPhone, of course. You're right. There's no big
breakthrough product.
I think the only thing they have done, which again, it's interesting because maybe it's the CEO's personality that reflects in the culture. What Apple has done the best, and all of us who have switched to the Apple laptops with their own chip, that's a non-incremental shift. Now they're going to make their own LCD screen. So I guess the question is how
the
How much
company
of
is
a
evolving.
personality? No, I know. How is the personality of the leader tied into the culture and what it values, and therefore what do you see coming
Yeah.
out?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, one can argue that it matters.
Yeah.
In closing, I was thinking, we've talked about founders, VCs invest in founders, and for founders, we've kind of drilled deeper. How should one think about Infinity VCs, because we are also part of this ecosystem.
Yeah, and the last 4-5 years, what's dawned on me, and I used to joke with the founders I work with, that every time we are telling them something, like I often look back and I say, why doesn't it apply to us? And I do think it does apply to us. So I think there is a concept of Infinity VCs. Ultimately, to be in business with I believe, with Infinity founders, if you're lucky, an Infinity founder will take you if you're not an Infinity VC, but I think you have to be an Infinity VC. So let's just talk about, I think this will be useful maybe for people who are looking at venture capital as an industry. The frameworks we have borrowed and we use. Internally we say thesis, evaluation, network, winning, which in this new world, and which is where I think an Infinity VC really counts, is very critical. Winning the deal. Does the founder want to work with you? And then value creation and exit. Importantly, this external framework which we borrowed from Mark Suster, which is personal brand, network and pull. So if we were to map the same 3 stages of a company and a founder with the 3 stages of a VC, I think it's very similar. 0 to 1, you find your first few customers, you find some product market fit. So you hustle and you get into some good companies. 1 to 10, you demonstrate a method where it's no longer just hustle.
Scalable.
It's scalable, repeatable. What is the flywheel? And typically, that flywheel is based on sectoral expertise,
Franchise building,
network building, franchise building, and stuff like that. How does that demonstrate itself? You start getting, maybe in the first phase, you get 1 or 2 markups. In the second phase, you start getting more and more markups within the same sector. So we spoke about internal flywheel and external flywheel. I think the internal flywheel becomes more complete and the external flywheel starts turning. You start getting recognized. Okay, there are people where, whether it was Vikram with fintech, okay, he's become the fintech guy, right? You were doing commerce. So we start getting recognized. That is very important when you come to the third phase. Because by the third phase, you are not picking founders. Founders are picking you. And that's a big shift. And that is not going to happen unless you yourself are able to transcend and get to the Infinity Flywheel journey. At the Infinity Flywheel, we have discussed this before, you have to be recognized by the founder. You have to have the pull where people want to come to work with you. I'll just, on a lighter note, talk about some of the metrics that one could actually associate with each phase. So some markups in 0 to 1. Consistent markups, maybe a unicorn or 2 in your sectors in the 1 to 10. I think the 10 to infinity is where it's IPOs. It's realized gains, or maybe not IPOs, but exits, right? Funnily enough, so I started talking about a few years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago, that the aspiration is not a $1 billion company, which is a unicorn. Of course it is. But again, that's the 1 to 10 journey. The aspiration is a $1 billion profit per company. And fortunately, I think we have 4 to 5 in our portfolio heading in that direction. Our peers also have some. I was reading about a firm that has probably 20 times our capital to manage, plays across all stages. And they have a total of 12 such companies over a 25-year history. So that, to me, if you really want infinity, that's infinity. $1 billion profit over, 20 companies. That would be nice.
amazing. Now I wanted to just to bring this together, like also share 1 or 2 case studies, because I think it's helpful, especially on the traits. I think most people, and I was also surprised to connect the dots on this one, but OneCard and Ola Electric, both companies in our most recent in Fund 3, both actually didn't launch their first product for 18 months or maybe even longer after they raised their first round of capital. And through that period, the clarity with which the founders...
Jupiter also took
clarity with which the founders were building, forecasting where regulation was trending, where government policies were trending, figuring out what the right org would be to scale those companies once they hit market. I mean, all of those things literally, I can't imagine, like in the past, folks would have been wondering, hey, what is this company doing?
By the way, we were wondering, and we learned how to work with them. If you ask me, Anurag was here yesterday, Amit is here today, Revant was here last week, Chirag interacting on Saturday. We are learning from them all the time. Ashish, like Pati. So one of the things we learned is that hustle is not the right metric at the infinity stage, right? And remember, even in the US, there's this concept of hustle culture and this, that. It is the thoughtful hustle. You do need to hustle. Ultimately, you have to hustle. But it's a thoughtful, well-directed hustle. So definitely something that is different.
Yeah. You talked about habits, maybe something for the entrepreneurs listening or others. How can one cultivate some of these things? Any learnings from your own personal journey?
Yeah. Well, it's not so much from my own personal journey. I think some of this is theory which I believe and I try to practice, but I think the others do very well. There is this concept of neuroplasticity of the brain. You know what that is?
Yes, I've heard of it, but I don't want to. I don't want to venture a guess.
Neuroplasticity means you can change your brain the way you want. So, what are the parts of the brain that often get talked about?
Lower brain?
No, that is separate. Left and right.
Left and
That's
right.
it. Yeah. We left it at that. For the last centuries, left brain, right brain. Actually, it is lower brain, middle brain, upper brain. Then this neuroplasticity, there is a single line that summarizes it. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So essentially, you create new pathways. So now if you look at Malcolm Gladwell's outliers, 10,000 hours, why are those 10,000 hours people successful? They have gone and connected certain dots or certain neurons in their brain where they become an expert in it. So I personally believe you have to treat your brain like a muscle. And you have to, and sadly for my children, this is what they hear almost on a every day or a second day basis, and actually stimulate it from all sides. There is no left or right brain. There are only three parts. Best judgment comes from the highest portion of it. And there are absolutely practices that you can follow that actually unlock it. So I think I will only encourage people that this is something that is very much acquired skill. And the traits that I have seen, and you should add to this, like for these infinity entrepreneurs, how do they actually exercise their brain? Voracious appetite for learning. Whether it is, I mean, with many of these, we'll get grilled when we meet them and constantly learning and then following up saying, can you send me this, that? So voracious appetite for learning, unbelievable curiosity, serious personal growth mindset. I think if you have this, then you start practicing these things that kind of put it all together and create these infinity entrepreneurs. I did want to go back to one of the things we didn't cover fully in the VC conversation is, ultimately for an infinity VC, don't lose sight of the fact that you're still an investor. And an investor comes with an investor mindset. And how is an investor different from everybody else? Investor thinks a lot about unknowns and what do I not know, and doesn't take things at face value and then tries to become an expert in the subject. And I really wanted to bring this out just because it was interesting that in the bull times, 2020, 2021, I read so many articles how Warren Buffett has lost his edge. Now, again, last 5 years, again, Berkshire returns are the best, right? He didn't get swayed by the FOMO, by the noise. So I think that clarity, and by the way, infinity entrepreneurs, infinity VC both need this clarity, right? And I just, just have patience, zero FOMO, clarity, become a domain expert. And I think some of these are similar. I just think what the founders do is much more, much harder and inspiring.
Thanks, Avi. Enjoyed doing this with you.
Super. Thank you. you.